I painted this painting based on a photograph by Scott Stulberg using the brushes in my Artistry Corel Painter Brushes Volume 1. And I thought I'd give you a guided tour of the brushes. And I want to say, to start out with, that you actually have 3 times as many brushes as you're going to see, because any brush can be turned into a cloner by clicking the rubber stamp in the color panel, or you can paint with the colors you choose by deselecting the rubber stamp in the color panel. So that's 2 different kinds of brushes that each brush can be. Then the other thing is, every brush can be turned either into a blender brush or a brush that paints with color. The way to turn a brush that paints in color into a blender brush is to lower the resaturation slider. Now here's a little tip. You don't always see the resaturation slider in the property bar. If you don't, click Advanced Brush Controls and you get this list of panels, and right here is a panel called the Well panel. There's the resaturation slider. So with the resaturation slider on 100%, the brush paints with color, and with the resaturation slider on 0%, the brush is a blender. So just to be clear, I said that every brush is really 3 brushes. So every brush is the brush that it is to start out with. Then you can either make it a different kind of mark making brush. If it's a blender, it can paint with color, and if it paints with color, it can paint as a blender. And then the 3rd brush that each one can be is it can be turned into a cloner. So let's take a look at all of the brushes. And for this particular brush collection, I wanted to have brushes that would paint in a smooth way for the hair and for the face, and in a textured way for the fur, but there are a lot more brushes in here besides the ones I used for this image. So I'm going to show you all the brushes, and some of them won't really pertain to this image, but I'll just show you what they do. So I'm going to zoom up on the image by dragging clockwise on the radial dial on the Wacom tablet, and I'm going to press the space bar and click and drag to maneuver elsewhere in the image. And to start out with, this multi-stroke brush paints just that way with multi-strokes. And I'm going to press Option on Mac, Alt on Windows, and I'm going to click in the image to pick up a color. I'm going to paint. I'm going to press Option Command on Mac, Alt Control on Windows, and I'm going to click and drag to change the brush size. And like I say, I didn't necessarily use all these brushes in this image, so you just see what this one does. I didn't use this one, but you can use this for backgrounds. I'm going to press Command Z on Mac, Control Z on Windows a few times to undo. Soften edges is great for softening edges. I'm going to pick up a color and paint, and then I'm going to pick up a color next to it and paint. So it's a way to create smoother transitions between colors, which softens edges. Another textured blender is what I used to paint the fur. And the strokes look a tiny bit different because I'm going to go in and choose a more textured paper, the simulated wood grain, Those are the brush strokes. So that's how I created the fur. I just went in and I painted. Notice the resaturation slider is all the way on 0, so I'm going to move it up a bit to paint with color. And then I can move the resaturation slider back to 0 to blend. Blendy Texture is another texture brush that I didn't use on this image, but you see how it paints, and it's certainly useful for painting with texture. You can also use it for hair, but in this particular image I was keeping the hair smooth, so I didn't use it for that, but you can use it for that. Bring in the Clouds is another textured brush, and I called it that because you can paint clouds with it. Another thing that's cool about this particular brush, if I choose another color in the back circle, and you always want to click on the front circle when you go to paint, it will pick up the color from the back circle. So it is adding a slight touch of blue. I'll make it a darker blue so it's more obvious. There we go. So it's a way to add two colors at the same time for a more painterly look. This bristles brush is useful for painting hair if you're adding texture, which I didn't in this particular image. And it's also useful for adding texture in the fur or any other kind of texture you need. Feathered ends with color is in this case good for hair. It gives you a more painted look. Notice the very oil painty look of the edges. And this feathered ends brush, this was a case where I threw in a brush already set up for you as a blender. Notice the resaturation slider's on 0. So this is blending what's already in the image. And again, in this case, I made the background textured, so I could use this to soften some of the texture, but still leave some texture there. That's one of the cool things about Painter. You'll get very painted looking paintings by varying the brush strokes instead of just having one brush stroke throughout. This flat strokes brush will give you areas of color. I'll just choose a color so you can see it really well. And this is a way to fill in or block in some color, and it winds up with a look of strokes but also a flat color. And what it's doing is when I first start painting, it paints with the color that's chosen in the color panel. But then if I don't lift the stylus and I keep painting, it blends at the ends. So it's a nice way to get nice brush strokes. Particularly good for backgrounds. This horizontal texture is one of my favorites. It gives you horizontal strokes. I'm going to zoom out so you can see them better. Let's make them a color so you can really see them. There we go. This is good for adding texture. Again, I didn't use it in this particular image, but you can see what it does. This is great for backgrounds also. And if I adjust the size slider, you see that the strokes are very textured. So you get a nice oil painting look. Great for backgrounds. More soft bristles I used for painting the hair. Here's a case where I'll click on the rubber stamp. This is a clone. If I turn on tracing paper by pressing Command on Mac, Control on Windows, and typing a T, you see that I do have a source photo attached. And if I paint with the rubber stamp chosen in the color panel, I can bring back the photo in a painted way. In the case of brushes that the clone color is selected, if you turn resaturation up to 100%, you'll get a more specific rendition of the source photo. More texture. I added another texture brush here. So it's adding the texture that's chosen here in the paper panel in a very interesting way. Another one of my favorites is this multi-texture because it paints with brush strokes. Another way to get texture. And yet notice with this particular brush, the brush strokes are varied, but they're smooth. So if you're a fan of the more smooth look versus the more textured look, this is a way to get multi-brush strokes in a smooth way. Safety Net is kind of a goofy brush, but I threw it in anyway. I don't know when you'd use it, and if you do use it, show me examples. I would love to post them. And I call it Safety Net because it reminds me of a hairnet. But if you find a use for it, let me know. Smoothie is a way to paint the smooth skin. And other facial details. Same with soft bristles. If I lower the resaturation slider, I can add a little bit of a bristly effect to make the face look a little bit more painted. Also useful for the hair. Soft color will add color in a textured way. If I go back to basic paper, I'll have less texture and just a hint of texture. Also a nice look. A subtle bristle blender does just that. It creates subtle strokes. Great for eliminating detail. The textured blender is one of those brushes that starts out as a blender and If you raise the resaturation slider, you can use it to add color. And it has a very interesting multiple stroke look. Vertical texture is another one of my favorite brushes. It paints in vertical brush dabs. Didn't use it for this image, but picture it for backgrounds. It's great. And we'll get rid of some of those. Last but not least is a smooth blender, also useful for painting skin and blending to soften areas in the hair. And that's a look at the Artistry Corel Painter Brushes Volume 1, available at the Artistry website. Thanks for watching.